The hall was packed. Rows of important people sat in their seats, dressed in suits and saris, their eyes fixed on the grand stage ahead. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, and the air buzzed with excitement. Everyone was waiting for the main event. Modi ji was going to speak. People whispered to each other, checking their programs. The spotlight danced across the banners that displayed big names: scientists, tech giants. Sundar Pichai was seated in the front row. Everyone expected his name to be mentioned first. Lakshmi Pichai sat near the end of the fifth row, quiet and unnoticed. She wore a simple green cotton sari. Her hair was tied in a neat bun, and her hands rested in her lap. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. She had come only to see her son receive an award. She never imagined anyone would care about her presence. As the announcer walked up and adjusted the mic, a hush fell over the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please welcome the Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi ji." The room erupted in applause. People stood. Phones rose in the air. Modi ji walked in calmly, his eyes scanning the crowd, a slight smile on his face. He walked up to the podium. The lights shifted. The cameras zoomed in. This was the moment the media had waited for. Everyone expected him to begin with the expected names. The billionaires, the innovators, the ones the headlines love. But Modi ji didn't start that way. He looked straight ahead. Then, after a moment's pause, he turned his head slightly and looked past the cameras, past the first row. His eyes landed on a woman in the fifth row. "Today," he said softly, "I want to begin by speaking about a woman who is not on the front row, not on the program, not even known to many of you, but she should be." The room went still. People glanced around. Who was he talking about? "Lakshmi Pichai," he said clearly. In that moment, Lakshmi froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked around to see if maybe there was another Lakshmi Pichai, but no one else moved. "She is not a CEO," Modi ji continued. "She is not a scientist or a minister, but she is a mother who taught values that built a man who changed the world." Lakshmi's eyes welled up. She hadn't expected this. Her hands trembled in her lap. Sundar turned slowly and looked back at her, his own eyes full. People began to whisper. A few gasped. Some clapped softly. They had come expecting a speech about success, strategy, and growth. But this was something different. Modi ji didn't care about the spotlight. He had chosen a woman who had sat in the shadows all her life. And now, he was shining the light on her. "When I read about how she raised her children," he said, "how she cooked every meal, taught respect, and never complained even when money was tight, I felt something stir inside me. Because this country was not built by famous names alone. It was built by mothers like her." People began to applaud, not just politely, truly, and Lakshmi. She couldn't stop her tears. Sundar stood up quietly. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't wave. He just turned to his mother and bowed his head. In that simple moment, cameras stopped mattering. Titles faded. What stayed was one truth: kindness, humility, and silent strength deserved the loudest applause. And Modi ji, still standing tall, said one final thing before moving on. "Today, before we celebrate success, let us remember the roots that made that success possible. Let us honor the hands that never asked for recognition but gave everything." Lakshmi had never felt smaller, and never felt prouder, as the crowd stood again to applaud. This time the spotlight gently found her face, but she looked down, quietly wiping her tears. Because she didn't come for attention, she came as a mother. But today, the nation saw her heart, and that was just the beginning. After the applause ended, the rest of the event continued, but something had changed. People weren't just clapping because they had to. They were listening, really listening. Lakshmi Pichai sat quietly, her eyes still a little wet. She had not expected this attention. Her son Sundar leaned over and gently touched her hand. She looked at him and smiled faintly, the kind of smile only a mother gives when words fall short. A young journalist sitting near her leaned forward. "Ma'am," he whispered, "may I speak with you after the ceremony?" She nodded politely, unsure why anyone would want to hear her story. After the event ended, while everyone rushed to take selfies with celebrities and ministers, a small group of reporters gathered around Lakshmi. One of them asked, "How do you feel after Modiji's words?" Lakshmi took a moment. "I feel seen," she said quietly. "But also, I'm just a mother. I only did what mothers do." But her story was more than just that. Lakshmi Pichai had grown up in a small village. Her father was a school teacher. Her mother cooked for temple festivals. They didn't have much, but they had values. Lakshmi had always been a quiet child. She watched the world carefully. She listened more than she spoke. She helped her mother cook meals and carried water from the well without complaint. She studied under street lamps when the power was out. She stitched her own uniforms when her family couldn't afford new ones. She passed her exams with high marks. But her dream of becoming a teacher faded when her family needed her at home. At 21, she got married. Her husband was kind, but also overwhelmed by responsibilities. When their children were born, she promised herself one thing: they would dream bigger than she ever could. She didn't have a smartphone. She didn't attend meetings, but she had a chalkboard and a white sheet on the wall. Every evening, she taught her sons math and English while cooking dinner. She believed education wasn't just about books. It was about values, truth, patience, and kindness. She never complained when her husband had to move cities. She adjusted. She never blamed anyone when her kitchen had only one pot. She managed. When Sundar was admitted to a foreign university, people in her neighborhood said, "How will you afford that?" Lakshmi smiled. She had been saving every rupee, sewing old clothes for neighbors, tutoring local kids. She sold her gold earrings quietly. She didn't cry when Sundar left. Not in front of him, but that night, in the corner of their room, she folded his bedsheet with shaking hands and wept. No one saw it, but that's the kind of strength she carried. The strength that doesn't shout. It stays silent and keeps moving forward, as she shared small parts of this story with the reporters. They grew quiet. They had come looking for a headline. Instead, they found something deeper. A woman who never chased fame, but built a life around purpose. "Did you ever expect your son would become someone so important?" one asked. Lakshmi looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I'd never thought about important. I only prayed he would stay kind." And that's what surprised everyone. Because while the world often celebrates wealth and power, Lakshmi celebrated small moments: when Sundar helped carry groceries without being asked, when he gave his blanket to a friend, when he stood up to a rude teacher not for himself but for a classmate. Those were her trophies. Those were her awards. That evening, as they returned to the guest house provided for the speakers and families, Sundar held his mother's hand. He said, "Amma did. You hear how loud the applause was?" Lakshmi smiled. "Yes, but that doesn't matter." "What matters?" he asked softly. She looked out the window of the moving car and replied, "That you heard your own heart above it." That line stayed with Sundar for a long time. He would later write it in his journal, frame it in his office, and even quote it in speeches. But at that moment, in the quiet of the car, with the city lights passing by, it was just a mother and her son. No stage, no spotlight, just the story behind the silence. And it was only beginning to unfold. The next morning, the hotel was buzzing with guests checking out. Journalists still discussing Modiji's surprising speech, and staff whispering about the mother everyone's talking about. But Lakshmi didn't know any of that. She was already up before dawn, as always. Old habits don't wait for hotel alarms. She sat by the window, watching the sky turn from black to soft gray. In her hands was a small diary, faded and bent at the corners. She had carried it for years. Not many had seen it, not even Sundar. Inside were handwritten notes, prayers, recipes, reminders to pay bills, and a few letters she had written to herself but never sent. This morning, she was adding a new one. She took a pen and wrote slowly, as if every word needed time. Dear Amma, today, the world clapped for me. But you would have said, keep your feet on the ground. Modi ji spoke my name, but you would have said, don't forget your roots. I miss you. I wish you could see what your granddaughter and I became. I still make rasam the way you taught me. And every time Sundar does something kind, I see your face in his. Love your daughter, Lakshmi. After she finished writing, she closed the diary and placed it gently on the nightstand. Meanwhile, in the hotel lobby, Sundar was being asked to attend an unscheduled interview. It was from an international news channel. They wanted a soundbite about his reaction to Modi ji's speech. But Sundar paused and said, I'll come, but I want my mother with me. The reporter was surprised. We can interview her later, she said. Double quotes no, Sundar replied. This time, she speaks first. Lakshmi hesitated when Sundar told her, Why me? She asked. Because you're the story, he answered. Lakshmi didn't know what to say. She had spent her whole life putting others first. How could she now be the one in front of the camera? But she agreed. The interview began with the usual questions: how she felt, what she thought when Modi ji mentioned her, how she raised her son. But midway through, the reporter asked something unexpected. What would you say to other mothers who feel invisible? Lakshmi paused. She hadn't prepared an answer, but she didn't need to. She looked directly into the camera and spoke softly. You are not invisible. You are the thread in the cloth. People may not see you, but without you, nothing holds together. The room went silent. Even the reporter used two fast questions and quicker sound bites. Took a second before moving on. After the interview, people began sharing that one sentence online. In hours, it was trending. You are the thread in the cloth. People wrote about their mothers, posted old photos, messaged their families. Many who hadn't spoken to their parents in months picked up the phone, and Lakshmi, she simply returned to her room and made tea for Sundar, because fame didn't change her rhythm. But something else happened that night. As Lakshmi was preparing to sleep, there was a knock at the door. It was a hotel staff member holding a letter. This arrived. For you, ma'am, he said. Hand-delivered. Lakshmi opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but elegant. Dear Ms. Pichai, I was in the audience yesterday. I have never cried during a political speech before. I am a single mother. My son doesn't talk to me anymore. He says I didn't do enough. But when Modi ji spoke about you, and when I saw your face, I remembered who I used to be. Thank you. You gave me strength, from a mother who needed it. Lakshmi held the letter close to her chest, not because it made her proud, but because it reminded her that every quiet act of love echoes somewhere, even when we don't hear it. And sometimes, the world just needs one voice to remind it, even if that voice speaks softly, even if it starts with a mother and a diary on a nightstand. As the days passed, Lakshmi Pichai's name began appearing in headlines, but she didn't read them. She was still the same woman who folded clothes with perfect corners, who reminded Sundar to drink warm water, and who felt uncomfortable seeing her photo in newspapers. She wasn't used to it. And truthfully, she didn't want to be. But the world had noticed her now. And sometimes, when the world notices someone who never wanted attention, strange things happen. Offers started arriving. News channels wanted full documentaries. Universities invited her to speak. A famous publisher emailed Sundar asking if Lakshmi would write a book about motherhood. Lakshmi read the email and softly said, What would I even write? I don't know big words. Sundar replied, Amma, your life is the book. Your words are already written in me. She smiled, but her heart was restless. That evening, she stepped outside the hotel for a quiet walk. No security, no cameras. Just a narrow street with tea stalls and flower sellers. She breathed in the scent of jasmine and hot cardamom. She stopped at a small temple she had never seen before. An old woman was lighting lamps inside. Lakshmi stepped in and folded her hands. The priest, noticing her, offered a kind smile. "You're the mother from the news, aren't you?" he asked gently. Lakshmi nodded, but said nothing. The priest chuckled. "You know, this temple is named after a woman who once gave away all her jewelry to feed her village during a drought. She never asked for a statue. She just wanted peace." Lakshmi listened quietly. "The world forgets the people behind the curtain," he continued. "But sometimes, the light turns in their direction. And that's not fame. That's grace." Lakshmi bowed her head. Something in his words stayed with her. Later that night, back at the hotel, she did something unexpected. She called the publisher herself. "I will not write a book," she said politely, "but I will help others tell their stories. Mothers like me, people who live behind the curtain." The publisher was surprised. "You mean, you want to collect stories?" "Yes," she said. "Not about me, about us." And so it began. With Sundar's help, they launched a small initiative. It was a simpler website where people could write letters to their mothers, or from mothers to their children, or stories of quiet sacrifice and strength. Within a week, hundreds of messages arrived. Some were joyful. "My mother walked 2 miles every day just to bring me milk so I could grow strong. Today, I bought her a new pair of shoes. I wish I had done it sooner." Some were filled with regret. "I never said thank you. She's gone now. But reading about Lakshmi Pichai helped me light a candle today, and I finally cried." And some were raw, honest, and healing. "I was ashamed of my mother because she couldn't speak English. Today, I read how Sundar Pichai's mother didn't go to college either. I sat down with my mother tonight and asked about her childhood. For the first time, I really listened." Lakshmi read each letter slowly, sometimes twice. She cried. She smiled. She prayed for every name. One evening Sundar walked in and saw her wiping her eyes. "Amma, is it too much?" he asked. "No," she said, closing the laptop. "It's just enough." Because she finally understood something. Her story was never just hers. It belonged to many. To every mother who packed lunch in silence. To every father who worked double shifts. To every grandparent who stayed behind in villages, so their children could chase dreams. She was not the exception. She was the reflection. And now, through every letter, through every line typed with trembling fingers or aching hearts, the quiet voices were being heard, and all because one man chose to ignore the spotlight and speak about someone who never asked for it. Lakshmi didn't seek the stage, but now she was building one for others. Brick by brick, story by story, truth by truth. The days rolled into weeks, and the letter project Lakshmi started began to grow far beyond what she imagined. People were not just writing stories anymore, they were asking for help, guidance, and connection. Students wanted to interview her for their school assignments. Mothers wanted to meet her in person. RETIRED. Teachers from rural towns sent postcards, thanking her for reminding the world that silent strength matters. Lakshmi stayed calm through it all. She still woke early, folded her saris with care, made filter coffee, and reminded Sundar to take breaks from screens. But one day, she received an invitation that made her pause. It was from a prestigious university in Delhi. They were hosting a national event for educators and community leaders. They wanted Lakshmi to be the opening speaker. She stared at the envelope for a long time. "Me, a speaker," she said, almost laughing. "You've been speaking all your life, Amma," Sundar said, "just not into microphones." Lakshmi wasn't sure. She had never spoken to a crowd, never faced a hall full of people staring up at her, waiting for wisdom. She could speak to a neighbor, a shopkeeper, a child, but a stage. Still, something inside her said yes. When she arrived at the university, the students gave her a standing welcome, not because she was famous, but because they had read her words. They had seen their own parents in her eyes. The auditorium was packed. Professors, social workers, village school teachers, and college students all sat in silence as Lakshmi walked slowly to the podium. She wore her simplest sari. She held no papers in hand. She just looked at the crowd and began. "I am not a speaker," she said gently. "I am a mother. I am a daughter. I am someone who used to believe her voice didn't matter." The room leaned in. But then one day, someone important said my name out loud. Not because I was rich, not because I was powerful, but because I raised a child with love and care. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop, and that made me realize the smallest acts matter. When you teach your child to say thank you, when you let someone else go first in line, when you tell the truth even when it hurts, those things change the world quietly. She paused and looked at the young faces in front of her. You will grow up and build companies, cities, maybe even nations. But don't forget the people who stood behind you when no one was watching. The hall was silent. No one clapped right away. No one moved, because her words didn't demand applause. They demanded thought, and sometimes silence is the deepest form of respect. Later that night, the university shared her speech online. Within hours, it was watched by millions. Not because it was flashy, not because it was loud, but because it was true. That same evening, Lakshmi received a letter from a teacher in a small mountain village. "Your words reached us even here. I have 5 students. Only one has shoes. But today, they all stood for the pledge and said thank you to their mothers. That has never happened before. You are changing things quietly, and we see you." Lakshmi read the letter, then folded it neatly and placed it beside her pillow. When Sundar entered the room, she said, "You know, I used to think I was invisible." He smiled, and now, she looked out the window, where the stars were faint, but steady. "Now I think I was just waiting to be useful in the right way." And in that moment, Sundar saw something he had always known, but never spoken. His mother didn't just raise a child. She raised a movement, one that reminded people that dignity doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs someone to listen. Months had passed since that day in Delhi. Lakshmi Pichai no longer walked through crowds unnoticed. Strangers greeted her with folded hands. Women touched her feet. Children hugged her without asking. The world had changed around her, but inside, she was the same woman who once saved every rupee in a jar behind the spice rack. The letter project had grown into something beautiful. It had become a national platform. Not just a website, but a traveling exhibition, visiting towns and villages, where people could read handwritten notes from mothers and children. Sometimes, there were tears. Other times, there were reunions. The spotlight still tried to follow Lakshmi, but she never stayed under it too long. She always stepped aside and pointed toward someone else, another mother. Another story then. One afternoon, an unexpected call came from the Prime Minister's office. Modi Ji wanted to meet her in person. At first, Lakshmi said no, not out of fear, but because she didn't think it was necessary. "I'm not doing anything special," she told the secretary on the phone. But Sundar said gently, "Amma, sometimes grace means saying yes." So she went. The meeting was not held in front of cameras. It wasn't even in a grand hall. It was a quiet room, just a few chairs, some tea, and 2 people who understood the language of simplicity. Modi Ji stood up as she entered and folded his hands respectfully. "You've changed the mood of this country," he said. Lakshmi smiled. "I didn't do anything alone. People were ready to feel. They just needed permission." He nodded. "And you gave it to them?" During their conversation, he asked her one question that made her pause. If you could leave one message behind, something this generation and the next could carry, what would it be? Lakshmi thought deeply. She looked down at her hands, worn by years of care and cooking and writing names in notebooks. Then she said quietly, "Tell them that being kind is not a weakness. Tell them that raising good humans is a form of leadership. And tell them to never forget the hands that held them before they could stand." Those words were later printed in booklets, shared in schools, and even inscribed in bronze at the entrance of the National Mother's Archive, which was named in her honor. But Lakshmi never mentioned that to anyone. She returned to her simple home, her garden, her kitchen, her quiet routine, because her work was never about fame, it was about light. And even light, she knew, shines best when it spreads quietly. Years later, after Lakshmi's time on earth had come to a gentle end, Sundar sat in her room, now empty, holding her old diary. He flipped to the last page. There was no long farewell, no dramatic quote, just a single sentence written in her soft, careful handwriting. "If I ever mattered, let it be because I made others feel that they did too." And in that moment, Sundar understood. His mother was never chasing the world. She was walking beside it, one gentle step at a time, helping it notice what it had forgotten: kindness, humility, quiet courage, and the power of listening. That evening, at a gathering held in her memory, Sundar stood on stage. People expected him to talk about her strength, her role in his life, her influence. But he said only one thing: "My mother never asked to be seen. She asked to see others. And that is how she will live on." The crowd didn't clap right away. They stood in silence, just like the first time Modi Ji had spoken her name, because some names do not echo loudly, they settle quietly into the hearts of those who are ready to remember. And Lakshmi Pichai became that name, not because she chased the spotlight, but because she reminded everyone what truly matters is what we do when no one is looking. The world moved forward, as it always does. New leaders rose. New voices filled the stage. Technology changed. Awards came and went. And the spotlight kept searching for its next moment. But something had shifted quietly, permanently, in cities and towns across the country. Schools started their mornings by reading one letter a week from the archive of stories that Lakshmi had helped create. Not just stories of success, but stories of effort, of failure, of love, of silent sacrifice. In a small village in Tamil Nadu, a girl stood up in front of her class and read aloud a letter written by her grandmother decades ago. The classroom was silent as the words trembled from her mouth. "I couldn't go to school because I had to carry water, but I promised myself my children would hold pencils, not pots." The girl didn't know it then, but the video of her reading went viral, and in less than a week, her school received funding to build a new water tank and a library, both named after her grandmother. The world kept noticing these little ripples. A mechanic in Lucknow fixed a minister's car and left a note saying, "I learned patience from my mother, who made rotis while studying at night." A baker in Kerala offered free bread on Fridays to single mothers. A teenage boy in Delhi recorded a video message apologizing to his mother for ignoring her efforts, ending it with, "I see you now." They didn't know each other, but they were all part of the same light. Lakshmi Pichai was no longer physically present, but her presence was everywhere, in gestures, in voices, in choices made when no one was watching. On the anniversary of her passing, Sundar organized a small gathering. It wasn't a grand function. It was in her garden, the same place where she used to plant tulsi and dry chilies in the sun. Just 50 people attend, friends, neighbors, some of the letter writers she had touched. There was no microphone, no banners, just a small whiteboard that said, "Write something you wish you had told your mother." One by one, people stepped forward and scribbled sentences. Some were shaky, some were bold, all were real. "I miss the way you sang while chopping onions. I never said thank you for packing my bag every morning. I'm sorry for not holding your hand more often." The board filled up, and then, at the edge of the garden, something unexpected happened. A little girl, maybe 10 years old, took off her school shoes and placed them neatly on the soil. She then looked at Sundar and said, "I want to be kind like her." Sundar knelt down and asked, "Like who?" The girl pointed at a photo of Lakshmi on a nearby wall, the lady who made other people feel warm inside. No one taught her those words. They came from somewhere deeper, and that was the proof. Lakshmi. Life was never about headlines or awards. It was about warmth, about truth, about holding others up gently, without asking for applause. And now that warmth lived in others. It lived in how people spoke to their elders, how they treated bus drivers, how they hugged their parents without reason, how they chose kindness in quiet moments. That was her real legacy. And even as new spotlights continued to shine on louder voices, in living rooms across the world, in kitchens, in quiet walks to school, and bedtime stories told by soft-spoken mothers, her name was still being whispered, not as a celebrity, but as a reminder that greatness can sit in the 5th row wearing a simple sari and still move the hearts of millions.